Daily Sacramento Kings talk has a new podcast home. It's the Matt George Podcast on Sactown Sports.
A Sacramento Kings trade has finally been made, and the Keon Ellis era is over here in Sacramento. Welcome into a raw emergency trade reaction edition of the Matt George Podcast, part of Sactown Sports. I am Matt George, and this is a sad but expected day. Bye-bye, Keon Ellis. We'll talk about the amazing two-way success story that Keon is in just a second. Keon is heading to Cleveland, where he will be part of the rotation of a playoff team, which I'm really excited to see for him. And he's not going alone. Point guard Dennis Schroder is also heading from the Kings to the Cavaliers in this deal. Dario Saric also leaving the Kings. However, he's heading to the Chicago Bulls, who are the third team to help facilitate this trade. And the Kings, they get DeAndre Hunter in return in this deal, but no draft picks headed to Sacramento. There are 2 draft picks involved in this trade, both of them heading to Chicago in order to take the $5 million Dario Saric contract. One of them is a second-round pick from the Cavaliers. The other one is a second-round pick from the Kings. From what I understand, it is the second-rounder that the Kings acquired when they did a sign-and-trade of Dennis Schroder earlier on, or going back to this past offseason. Let's talk. We're going to break this down into sections. We'll talk first about Keon. Then we'll talk about the Dennis Schroder element of this, because I know this has a lot of fans frustrated. I've seen the reactions on Twitter tonight. Fans are up in arms about the failure of Dennis Schroder and how Scott Perry has to wear a lot of that. And then we'll talk about what the Kings got, DeAndre Hunter. Keon Ellis, first and foremost, has been an absolute joy to cover and to get to know over the years that he's been here in Sacramento. Always has a smile on his face, super respectful, willing to answer questions. I remember when Keon was a rookie, an undrafted rookie free agent. And I remember having a chat with him at a Kings practice early in the season. It was after we saw our first intro video that the Kings make. They do these very cool, creative introduction videos before starting lineups. And Keon Ellis was the first face you see in that intro video that year. So I remember pulling Keon aside and going, man, you're a rookie. You're the first face they show in the intro video. And he and I had a fun back and forth about that. But Keon has been wonderful. And Keon is the epitome of why the two-way contract was created. Keon Ellis is the ultimate success story. The only person that can hold a candle to the Keon Ellis success story of a two-way contract is Austin Reeves. That's it. Like, Keon's journey through the NBA, again, undrafted, out of Alabama, picks the Sacramento Kings because he saw the need for perimeter defense. He comes to Sacramento, he gets his opportunity after staying patient his rookie season, gets the opportunity to start and has earned that full contract that he got, has earned even more than that full contract, and I guarantee you a payday is headed Keon's way. I don't know if the Cleveland Cavaliers will give it to him or another team will. I have to imagine the Cavs will probably negotiate it with them now that they've acquired him. But Keon is an incredible success story, an unbelievably talented player. So proud of him, and whether or not his exit from Sacramento is good or not, because I know Keon was probably not too happy with, 1, having his option picked up and not getting a bigger payday going into the season, and 2, how he's been treated or how he's been in and out of the rotation, getting DNPs at times this season. I'm not going to pretend that Keon Ellis was happy sunshine and daisies and rainbows with how everything was going here in Sacramento. I've heard no indication of any bad blood or anything like that between Keon and the Sacramento Kings organization, but no matter what, like, he will be a part of Kings history. He will be another example of a few success stories. So the Sacramento Kings have had with the two-way contract. Neemias Queta, the starting center for the Boston Celtics, a two-way guy with the Sacramento Kings. Of course, we have Dylan Cardwell right now shining with the Sacramento Kings, but Keon is that ultimate example. I wish him the absolute best, and I know Kings fans, it's going to sting a little bit to see Keon balling out for the Cavaliers in the playoffs, but I think he's going to do great there, and time will tell if he is truly the player that we thought he was here in Sacramento, and if he can be that for a team not just with playoff, but with potential championship aspirations in the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think this is a great pickup for Cleveland, so any Cavs fans watching, enjoy Keon Ellis. You are going to love him. Now let's talk about the Dennis Schroder element of this trade. Yes, to some extent, this trade is an admission of guilt from Scott Perry. There's a lot about this roster that Scott Perry does not own, that Scott Perry is not responsible for. The vast majority of this roster, he is not responsible for. But he is responsible for not extending Keon Ellis earlier and potentially avoiding all of this. And he is responsible, for the Dennis Schroder signing, which ended up being not a complete catastrophic failure of a signing by any means, because it's not like the Sacramento Kings paid him a boatload of money. They did give him a 3-year deal, but it's important to know, one, the third year is only partially guaranteed at $5 million, and two, the Kings had to make it a 3-year deal in order to do the sign and trade for him with the Detroit Pistons. So there's reasons behind it. They didn't just throw 3 years at him for willy-nilly sake. And the Dennis Schroder frustration that I'm seeing from Sacramento Kings fans right now is, I guess, warranted to some extent, because it wasn't the greatest of signings for Scott Perry. But let me help try to share why this trade makes complete sense to me and my understanding of why Scott Perry and the Kings went this route. It is my understanding that, well, it's been made very clear from reports from Sam Amick, Jake Fisher, all sorts of conversation around the league. We knew Keon Ellis was a hot commodity. We knew there were a lot of teams trying to get involved in the Keon Ellis sweepstakes. And we knew the Sacramento Kings had this idea, the number one asking price, the top asking price, was a first-round pick for Keon. Well, I can't imagine that a lot of teams were throwing high-quality first-round picks the way of the Sacramento Kings, or this trade would have probably been done a long time ago. It is my understanding that the Sacramento Kings accepted this trade, chose this deal, because they ultimately chose a wing in DeAndre Hunter, who we'll talk about in a little bit. They chose DeAndre. They chose someone to give them depth at a position that they sorely need depth at, who also fits the mold or idea or what Scott Perry and Doug Christie, their image for the Kings going forward. The 6 pillars, right? They seem to feel that DeAndre Hunter fits those 6 pillars. And they chose to get DeAndre Hunter and no draft picks, but being able to move off of the contract of Dennis Schroder over either dead money, expiring deals that were essentially just a salary dump that they would just sit on the books and then come off the books at the end of the year, and that would be that, and subpar, below average, not really good draft compensation that would move the needle. I have no idea personally. I have no clue if there was ever a first-round pick on the table for Keon Ellis. I don't. But I have to imagine if there was one, we're probably talking one that's so late of a first that you're basically getting into second-round territory. If the Kings were offered a first-round pick that was likely to convey in the late teens to even early 20s, I think Scott Perry would have jumped on that already. I don't think that ever existed, or at least that offer hadn't come yet. Maybe it would have come if there was a bidding war between all these teams, and it would have happened right before the trade deadline. But the Cleveland Cavaliers are a team that is expecting to be in contention. The Cleveland Cavaliers are interested in Keon Ellis because they view him as a depth piece that will help them make a deep run. Therefore, a Cleveland Cavaliers first-round pick is not expected to be very, very good. We're probably talking, at best, mid-20s. And these are the type of teams that were interested in Keon Ellis. So again, I can't tell you firsthand that I know that first-round picks were on the table or not. I can't tell you firsthand that Scott Perry chose this trade over any deal that did involve the Kings getting a first-round pick back. But what I believe happened here is that Scott Perry, instead of choosing a deal that maybe got them a couple second-rounders, Scott Perry chose to attach Keon to Dennis Schroder's deal in order to get that money off the books, get rid of some of that backcourt logjam that hopefully frees up an opportunity for Malik Monk to return to that backup secondary ball handler point guard position that he's been so good at, frees up more minutes for Neef Clifford to not have anybody in his way to get more playing time. They chose a guy, in theory, in DeAndre Hunter. Time will tell if this is true or not, but they chose a guy that seems to fit the vision going forward, who also gets them depth desperately at a position of need. How long have we been talking about wing depth for the Sacramento Kings over the last handful of seasons? They chose that route over some picks that ultimately really wouldn't have meant that much for the Kings. That is my understanding of the situation. And the backlash that I got when sharing that or putting that out there on social media was, Matt, he gave Dennis Schroder the contract. So he chose a deal instead of going for draft picks. He chose to move off of the contract that he offered. It's a failure on Scott Perry. Understand this. Scott has been clearly trying to move on from multiple of these veteran contracts. If the Kings had their way, this isn't it. They're not done. The Sacramento Kings are going to still try between now and the trade deadline on Thursday. They are still going to try to move on from some of these other deals. But what have we heard? What have we seen? What have we speculated about these markets for these veterans since the summertime? There's very little market for Malik Monk. There's very little market for DeMar DeRozan. And then Zach LaVine and Domantas Sabonis are paid so much freaking money that even teams that could be interested in them as players can't really accept or justify adding almost $50 million of salary to their books. Like, that's a big deal here. That's important context to understand. Yes, Scott Perry ended up moving the contract that he had signed, that he had offered, not any of the ones that he inherited. But he moved Dennis Schroeder's contract because it was the easiest one to move because he negotiated it to be that way. I'm not trying to get out in front of Scott Perry, defend Scott Perry in any kind of way, even though it may seem like that. You're going to argue, Matt, you're being a mouthpiece for the organization, blah, 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 blah. You work for the flagship station of the Kings now, blah, 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 mouthpiece. No, this is just common sense. I'm just explaining to you what Scott Perry was thinking. I promise you, if Scott could have moved any of the other veterans over Dennis Schroeder, he would have done it because Dennis Schroeder was his guy and all those other guys are not his guys. I'm telling you what I believe the thinking to be with Perry. I'm telling you what I believe the reasoning to be, what I understand the reasoning to be. And again, it makes perfect sense to me. If the Kings could have avoided trading Dennis Schroeder and could have traded any of these other veterans, I firmly believe they would have done it. They've been trying to. But it sounds like that really wasn't on the table. Or if it was on the table, it was in a way that didn't get the Sacramento Kings the return that they were looking for. More than likely got them a player or players or contracts that are either longer money deals or for players that didn't necessarily fit the idea or fit the vision for what the Sacramento Kings are trying to do and want to be going forward. That's where DeAndre Hunter comes in. If you aren't familiar with DeAndre Hunter, he's a 6'7" small forward, 28 years old, was drafted and spent the first handful of seasons of his career with the Atlanta Hawks, but has been with the Cleveland Cavaliers over the last 2 seasons. For his career, he averages 14 points per game, also 4 rebounds, just under 2 assists. He's a career 44% shooter from the field, 36% three-point shooter, 82% free throw shooter. In terms of defense, he's considered to be a better isolation one-on-one on-ball wing defender than he is a team defender, but he adds some defensive depth at that forward position. He's not the defender that Keegan Murray is. Keegan will still take those responsibilities, but he will add a little bit better of a defensive presence on the wing. As for this season, his numbers are slightly down in terms of scoring. He's averaging 14 points per game with the Cavaliers, shooting 42% from the field, just 30% from three-point range. That number's not great, but his rebounds slightly up to 4.2. His assists also slightly up, just over 2 assists per game. He is a in-and-out starter for the Cavaliers. He started 23 of 43 games for Cleveland this season, but the majority of the time over his time with Cleveland, he's been someone to come off the bench. I don't know. I'm not going to try and sell DeAndre Hunter to you because I personally don't know how good he will be for the Sacramento Kings. I don't know how perfectly or how well he fits the vision for the Kings, whether it's a short-term or long-term vision. Does DeAndre Hunter make sense for the Kings to start their rebuild and add another body next to Keegan Murray? Maybe. I understand some people who feel like this is prioritizing a more win-now talent than draft compensation, the future. I don't believe the Sacramento Kings are making this move in order to make a last-ditch, silly run at a play-in spot. I think this is addressing depth, adding someone again that in theory fits the mold of the Kings going forward, giving Keegan a partner on the wing in that front court defensively. And again, I think the Kings prioritized getting someone, a player that's reasonable, a player that has a future with the Sacramento Kings potentially, someone who has upside over just dead money and second round draft picks. Or if there was a first round draft pick on the table, I imagine it was not the most impressive. In terms of DeAndre Hunter's contract, he's got 1 year left on his deal. He's owed $24.9 million next season. After that, he comes off the books. So it might just be a 1 year trial for DeAndre Hunter. We'll see if the Sacramento Kings try and prioritize him being more of a part of the Kings' future. He'll be 29 years old next season, so we'll have to wait and see with that. I'm not in love with the acquisition of Hunter. I'm curious at the very least. And to some extent, y'all, like that's what I've been asking for. That's what we've been asking for. I do hope that the Kings give us more. I do hope that something more is on the horizon to truly start this rebuild. This did not feel necessarily like a rebuild type move, which is why I think a lot of people had frustrations. But the way I believe this is like a rebuild type move, or the way that this trade most resembles a rebuild type move, was the removal of Dennis Schroder. Was moving on from Schroder, his contract, the position, the logjam at that guard position. That's where I believe this trade prioritizes the rebuild. DeAndre Hunter, I don't know. To be determined. But I'm curious what Hunter looks like, especially when Keegan Murray comes back from his injury. If DeAndre Hunter and Keegan Murray get to play next to each other, what DeAndre Hunter looks like, giving the Sacramento Kings some wing depth. I'm curious with that. And again, that's what we've been asking for. For the rest of the season, was there going to be a reason to watch? Was there going to be something new? I compared the Kings to just a very stuffy, stinky room that you just needed to open a window and get a breath of fresh air in here. I'm not expecting DeAndre Hunter to get widely cheered when he takes the floor for the first time in the Golden One Center. I'm not expecting an overwhelmingly positive reaction from the Kings fan base about this trade. I know how much y'all loved Keon Ellis. And I know how you feel about the Dennis Schroder signing. I don't necessarily blame you. I don't think this is the sexiest trade on the planet, but I do feel that at least Scott Perry believes this is a necessary first move to get where the Sacramento Kings are trying to go. Time will tell if it works out or not. Now I want to hear from you. Your thoughts at MattGeorgeSac on Twitter or X. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, leave your comments in the YouTube comment section down below. You like the trade? You don't like the trade? What did you think of my explanation of, from what I understand, why Scott Perry made this move, the other offers that he was balancing this move against? Your thoughts on DeAndre Hunter specifically, the loss of Keon Ellis, whatever you want to talk about, it is fair game. Hit me up and let's talk about it. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac. Again, you can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your comments in the YouTube comment section down below. I will be talking more about this trade as maybe more information comes out, and if there's any more coming, we will be talking about that not just in future episodes of the Matt George Podcast, but on the Matt and Kayla Show, my radio show from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday on Sactown Sports, AM 1140 on your radio dial. You can hear us dive more into this trade at that point. We'll also wait and see if there's any kind of press conference or anything from the general manager of the Kings, Scott Perry, where maybe he will explain this and other potential moves a little bit more. One more time, I wish Keon Ellis the absolute best of luck. I didn't really know Dennis Schroder that much. Seemed like a cool guy. Never really got an opportunity to interact with him beyond like a press conference setting or asking him questions like in a media scrum. But I did get to spend a lot of time talking to Keon and getting to know Keon. I think he's an incredible talent, an awesome young guy, and I really look forward to watching him shine, hopefully, in the playoffs. As much as that might sting for Sacramento Kings fans, Keon is at a better situation. And Cavs fans, Cleveland, take good care of our boy. And believe me, he will take good care of you with what he brings to the court. That'll do it for this emergency podcast here, this emergency edition of the Matt George Podcast. I appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to join you on the next episode tomorrow night after Kings and Wizards. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Matt George Podcast, part of Sactown Sports.